Now, the problem of manuscript variants, I just want to say to you again, we don't have the original authors. We're removed by hundreds of years. I've mentioned to you earlier that our Masoretic text came from the 9th century A.D. We do have the Septuagint in English, which is 250 B.C., and I want to tell you right now, that Septuagint, many places in the Old Testament, is radically different from your English translation. The book of Jeremiah, the book of Hosea are radically different in the Septuagint and in the Masoretic text, which simply means when you compare those, you're going to be real surprised how different it is. Now, we're assuming the Masoretic text is the standard, okay? But here's a good way to compare. Now, I put these New Testament manuscripts down. I'm not sure how much I want to do that with you, just to say this. Our earliest copies of the Greek New Testament are on papyri, which is a river reed from Egypt, like a brown paper bag. We have several of those, not a whole lot. They are about 200 years after the death of Christ. Most of the Bible that you have, English Bible, is made from manuscripts from the 4th, 5th, and 6th centuries, okay? I don't think I want to go into all the different names for them. They're 1.5 feet long. They all have strengths and weaknesses. You ought to get a copy of Introduction to Textual Criticism. Know something about manuscripts, right? It'll help you when you see those marginal notes. It'll take you, get it from a library, it'll take you a day to read. It's not a big deal, it's just a new area, okay? It'll help you understand what I'm trying to say about variation in manuscripts. Does it say you shall be saved, or does it say you will be saved? Well, sometimes the two different manuscripts, one says one and one says the other. And it's often hard to know which one is original. So we have that problem, we got to deal with it. I've given you those suggested books again here. I've added, some of these are from the Zondervan Pictorial Bible Encyclopedia, which if you don't have, that's a great thing to give to someone you love for Christmas. It'll do this manuscript, introduction to manuscripts. It'll do background to books. It'll do everything for you. I've given you those books. Now, there's a set of books that I don't have down there, but under number 4, I want to mention when I say compare modern translations. I wish I'd have brought my copy. There's a new set of books out, 3 volumes, and it's called The Bible in 26 Translations. Have you ever seen that? The Bible in 26 Translations. And the publisher is AMG out of Chattanooga, Tennessee. The Bible in 26 Translations, AMG Publishers. Now, the reason I think it's so important is this. It has King James in bold print, Old Testament and New. And under King James, out of a possible pool of 26 translations, it gives you the 5 most noticeable or meaningful variables. Oh, that's neat. You mean in one book, there's one volume in the New Testament. I can get the real meat out of 26 translations by using one volume? Yeah. It costs $9.50 for that New Testament volume in paperback. Well, that's good. You get a wide view of translation comparison in one little volume. The Bible in 26 translations. I hope you'll get that. I want to mention the problem of human language again. Not only have we got hand-copied manuscripts, not only do we have difference in time and culture, but you realize that just human language is hard to talk about God. I mentioned that last night briefly, right? It's analogous. You know God is not a man, but we talk about him as if he was a man, right? You know the Spirit's not a dove, but we use dove. You know that flames of fire, where it says like flames of fire in Pentecost, they weren't really flames of fire, were it? But how do we talk about something like that? The Spirit came down as a dove, as Jesus baptized. They were like cloven tongues of fire, right? We're using analogies. We're using one symbol to represent another symbol. Well, that's hard to get a handle on. When we talk about spiritual things, we're only talking about analogies. Is heaven street of gold? Is hell a black cave in the ground? I doubt it. But it's probably either a lot better or a lot worse than that. So, we're analogies. Now, the problem of written text. Not only is human language bad, but you miss one more point of human communication when it's written, not spoken. When I speak to you, if I'm using an irony, maybe I might wink at you, or I might smile at some point, and you know I'm making a funny thing, right? But if it's in written style, how do you know in writing that I'm making a pun? How do you know in writing I'm using allegory or irony? You can't see my bodily gestures. You can't see me kind of, like when Jesus talked to the woman, the Syrophoenician woman, and said, I can't give the food to the dogs, calling her a dog, being a Gentile. And she came back and said, even the little puppies eat the food that falls from the master's table. I don't think Jesus looked her in the eye and said, you dog, Gentile, you. I think he must have winked at her and said, that's a play there. But we don't see it written in text. So a written text is one more farther removed from me seeing you talk to me, right? If I see you, I'd pick up a whole lot more than if I just read what you said. Well, all we have is what's read, what's written. We can't analyze a person's thoughts. We can't analyze a person's motives. We can't analyze a person's body language. All we have is a written text. That makes it even more hard to interpret. But I still think we can. Now, all that is question number one, is what? What did the author say? I need to understand what he really said before what? I understand what he meant. I've got to know the words he used and how he used them before I know what he meant by those words, right? So the first question is, establish the text. If there's manuscript variation, try to find out what and why. If the words mean different things, try to find out from the way different translations do it. You'll find that some words, there'll be 26 different translations. What does that tell us? We don't know what that word means, right? We're guessing. Everybody's guessing. So don't build a major theology on a word that nobody knows what it means, right? You just couldn't build that much there. So be cognizant of that. Now here's the second question. What does an author mean? How do I get at meaning in a written text? How do I really know what that author was trying to say? Well, here's some guidelines. Number one, identify the original author's purpose in the biblical book. Are you getting tired of me saying that? I've said it a million times, and you're going to hear it a million more times before we get through this thing. What am I telling you? You've got to know what he was trying to say, not what you want to say. Amen? We've got all these biases and filters. We've got to make sure we know what he is saying. So how do you do that? Okay, I want to give you a structure of how you can do that. Here is a practical system of how you can know the original author's intent. Understanding the whole will help you analyze the parts. Now, what am I saying to you? If you're trying to interpret Romans chapter 5, isn't it logical that you're going to have to read the whole book of Romans first? You wouldn't just go to chapter 5 and say, I know what this means, without knowing what chapters 4 and 6 and 12 mean, would you? What if I took one of your love letters from high school and I went to the third paragraph and wrote the second sentence on the board? I could embarrass the hound out of you, right? If I didn't know something about why that letter was written, if I didn't understand the whole letter, I could totally misunderstand the intent of that letter if I pulled one sentence or one paragraph out of that love letter, couldn't I? Or it could be juicy, or it could sound ugly. Don't you know we do that to the Bible when we jump at one verse without knowing what that author was saying? Aren't the biblical books nothing more, most of them, than long letters to a local situation or about one subject? I guess what I'm saying to you is we can tell the author's intent, overarching intent, only by reading the author's whole message. You've got to read the book you're trying to interpret at one sitting. You wouldn't get a letter and read the first paragraph now and the second paragraph 2 days from now and the third paragraph a month from now and think you understood that letter, would you? We do it to the Bible all the time. So I'm saying the first way to make sure you don't lose the original author's intent, whatever book you're interpreting, make sure you read it through one time at one sitting in whatever translation you like. Now, the first time you read through it, what are you looking for? What do you want to write down? What are you trying to catch the first time you read the whole book out of which you want to interpret a part? Okay, look at this. First reading. Look for the overarching plan or purpose. Now, how do you do that? In one sentence, or maybe it takes two for some books. In one sentence, try to capture the essence of that whole book. Now, would you turn back to the back of your notebook, I think it's right after this definition of Greek terms, it's this blue sheet with the blue top on it like this. Right behind that is a sample worksheet of Romans. I have done Romans chapters 1 through 3, as a sample for you to show you the method I'm giving you right now. I have done partially of Romans. Have you found that sample worksheet? Now notice it says first reading, number A, the overarching purpose. In my opinion, the overarching purpose of the whole book of Romans is, how is a man right with God, both initially and ongoing? Or, how is a man saved, and then how does he live, right? Now, I think that's the thrust of the book of Romans. Okay? I have also, under B, found a key verse. Notice, I think I mentioned that to you. Look for a key verse or paragraph that expresses the theme. To me, the book of Romans has one of these key verses. And the key verse is Romans 1, 16 and 17. I'm not ashamed of the gospel of God. It's the power of God unto salvation to all who believe, to the Jew first and also the Greek, and that's it. That's the theme of the book. If you can find that, you got a handle on the overarching purpose. Now look at another one. Find the literary genre. Now I haven't talked about that yet, but I will. Literary genre is just basically a French word that means what kind of literature is this? Is it prophecy? Is it poetry? Is it law? What is it? Well, Romans is obviously what? It's a letter, right? It's a simple letter. So that's going to help me know how to interpret it. I'm going to interpret a simple letter very literally, right? Because that's what it's a literal kind of literature, literal kind of writing. So the first reading, that's all I do. I look for the overarching theme, I look for a key verse, a key paragraph, a key chapter, and I try to decide what kind of literature is this. Is it a poetry book, prophecy book, historical narrative, a letter? What is it? Okay? Now the second reading. Remember, there's 4 readings involved in this. 7 questions, 4 readings. Second reading. Note the major literary divisions. Now, what am I saying about that? It sounds complicated because I'm trying to put in language what you do normally when you read. When you read and it says Dick and Jane ran to the store and they bought this Coke and they came home, and then it says, now Mother, coming home at the same time from work, rode the Coke. You know that there's a major shift in what's happened between Jane going to the store and Mother coming home, right? It's obvious to you in your mind. You don't even think about that. You just say, here's a thought, Jane went to the store. Here's a thought, Mother came home. The Bible authors do that. All I'm saying is you read this the second time with a notepad, write down. Chapter 1 is obviously introduction, right? First part of it. Chapters 1, 2, and 3 basically deal with one subject. All men are lost. Chapters 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 basically deal with how is a man right with God. Chapters 9 through 11 deal with the problem, what about the Jews? Chapter 12 through 15 is how do you apply the gospel. Chapter 16 is greetings and closings. Now that's not that big a deal, right? You just got to get used to thinking that way. When I'm reading this, is the subject changing? If it is, make a note. You say, well, Bob, how do you know if the subject changes? Therefore, then, John said, he moved from Jericho to Israel, whatever. There's little keys that you pick up without even thinking about it, that we transcend from one thought to another. Am I communicating what I'm talking about? This is not paragraphs, is it? It's big blocks. I'll give you an example. If I want to interpret what is spiritual giftedness, if I want to talk about spiritual gifts, I've got to go to the major literary unit in the Bible on spiritual gifts, which is 1 Corinthians 12 through 14. I can't interpret any part of 12, 13, or 14 unless I know that's one whole thought. That's one whole subject. It's got to be held together. What about the Jews? I've got to go to Romans 9 through 11. I can't interpret anything in there unless I know the whole thing is hanging together by one subject. If I want to go to study the Sermon on the Mount, I've got to know that Matthew 5 through 7 is one sermon, right? I wouldn't dare interpret chapter 7 without reading 5 through 7, would I? It's one sermon. It's a literary unit. That's what I'm trying to say. On the second reading of the book, see if you, now don't read it, you have not looked at the front page of your study Bible yet. You have not copied Ryrie's outline. You have not even looked at the study Bible notes, right? You haven't compared anybody. It's you. This is the Spirit's way of protecting you from being led by the nose by someone else. Okay? You've read it all the way through once. You've got the overarching. You've got the literary genre. You've got the key verse if you can find one. Secondly, you've read it through again. And as you've read through, you've made a note of the change of major subject topics, or the change of persons, or the change of location. What am I trying to get you to do? Simply outline this book. An outline is nothing more than our cultural way of what? Discerning the structural thought pattern of a piece of human writing. Isn't that right? Isn't that what outlining is? Gives you the big blocks and the little blocks, right? Lets you know that the book of Romans has 4 or 5 major truths that are developed in this way. So all I'm advocating is an outlining procedure that you do by yourself first. Okay, so the second reading, you make a note of the large literary units and you summarize their content in a simple sentence. Romans 1:18 through 3:21, the lostness of all men. Look at your sample in the back. Do you see under second reading that sample worksheet on Romans, the very back of your notebook? Under second reading, number A, I've given you what I think are the major divisions of Romans. Now, you'll find them different in different books. This is what I think. Then I went back through in B, and I basically put a slight introduction to them, or capsule. 1:18 through 3:21 is the lostness of all men. There's a summary of that section. That's what the whole thing's about. That's the second reading. Now, the third reading. You've read the entire book through twice. Now you're coming back the third time, and what are you going to do? Okay, the third time, you say, well, Bob, I don't want to read that whole book 4 times. I know it because you used to shortcut easy fixes from commentators. And the truth is, you know and I know if you buy 4 commentaries, you get 4 interpretations, right? I'm trying to allow the Spirit to speak to you first before you're influenced by somebody. The only way to do that, the only way is to pay the price of some kind of analytical, systematic reading personally before you go to any of these books. They're helpful, but they'll lead you by the nose if you go to them first, right? So you've got to outdo this on your own. You haven't looked at any book except the Bible yet, right? And you prayed, of course, to ask the Lord to help you. Now, this second time through, you've noted the major literary units. You're summarizing their contents. Now, before you go to the third reading, right here at the last, before you go back to the book again, you're going to pick up one of 3 books or types of books to see if you really have caught the essence of this book. You're going to try to confirm your overarching purpose and your major literary units. That's what you're going to try to do. Now, how would you do that? How would you check yourself? Well, we believe that God has spoken to other men, hadn't he? That he's given gifted, godly men to the church. So we're going to try to corroborate our understanding with the community of faith. How do you do that? There's several kinds of books. Number 1 is an intro book, an introduction to the Bible, introduction to the New Testament, introduction to the Old Testament. Turn to the book of Romans, and it will tell you, it will give you an outline. At this point, all you want to check is the outline. Don't read anything else in that book. Just see if your major outline division matches what these introductions say. Okay? Number 2, maybe you have an encyclopedia, a Bible dictionary, a Bible handbook. Okay, look up the book by the name and see if it has an outline there of the major units. Number 3, maybe you have a study Bible like the NIV study Bible, and on the front page of every book it gives you an outline of that book and some brief background. See if the outline matches to some extent. Not exactly. See if you've caught the general flow. And then number 4, every commentary I know has a section on introduction. Check in the commentaries you have. See if these books, one or more of them, confirm your outline. Just the basic outline. That's all I want. The big major points. That's all you're checking right here. Don't read any more now. Just check the major points. See if you have caught the flow of the author's thought. All right? Now you can see what I've done here. I haven't included the checking other people in your worksheet on Romans, but I went back and looked at other outlines after I did mine, and I was pretty much in line with what everybody else had seen, so I felt good, right? Now, I may see something they never saw. But friends, if you see something that nobody in the history of the church ever saw, I'm worried about you. Right? No great man of faith ever saw it divided the way you divided it. I think I'd be divided. Right? Now, the third reading, okay? What are we going to do in the third reading? We're going to take these notes on the historical background. Remember I told you we take the language, its normal meaning, we try to see the overall purpose, and now what are we doing? We're trying to see, you haven't read any books yet, right? Except the Bible. You have not picked up that shiny new commentary you bought for $18,000. You have not picked that up yet, right? You will. It will help us, but you haven't yet. You're going to read through the third time, and you're going to have a worksheet there. And this worksheet's going to be divided into historical background, And under that historical background, it's going to say author, date, recipient, occasion, uniquenesses. Okay, now you're reading through this whole book. All you want to interpret is verse 2 of chapter 4. But you can't do that without what? Seeing the big picture first. Okay? You've read through the whole book the third time, and you notice that in chapter 1, verse 1, it tells you who the author is. Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ, called by God, right? Okay? Under author, you're going to put Paul, chapter 1, verse 1. And then it's going to say, to the elect of Galatia. Well, recipients. Chapter 1, verse 2. The elect of Galatia. All right? Then it says, because you all are so mad about homosexuals. Then you've got it right there. What is the occasion of the writing? Paul is upset about homosexuality in the churches of Galatia. You put that down. Chapter 1, verse 3. Now, as you read through these books, you'll find little tidbits of this information spread throughout the book. Something more is going to be said about the author. Something more is going to be said about those who received the letter. Something more is going to be said about the problems that initiated the letter being sent. And something more is going to be found about how this book is kind of unique. You have never read this kind of thing before. Now, that is going to be confusing to you until you do it. I can stand up here and whistle till I'm blue in the face, and until you take a little New Testament book like Jude or Philemon or 3 John and do this program to it, it will not make sense. But once you do it to a little book, you'll go, wow, look how much I know from just reading that book. You haven't looked at a commentary yet. Now, let me tell you the truth, what I've done. I have tried to develop a program where third world pastors that don't have any reference books can adequately interpret the Bible themselves. You've got the blessing of research tools. They don't. This program will work for them too. Because what am I doing? This is all first-hand primary source material information. Right? I can do this myself. I don't have to be a scholar. I don't have to have research books. I don't even have to have multiple translations, though they're very helpful. So what I'm doing is giving you a way to interpret the Bible for yourself. Now, we're going to corroborate our understanding by our research tools, right? We've got the research tools. Let's check ourselves. But don't be what? Don't be dependent on them. Use them. Don't let them use you. How many times someone says, well, anything F.F. Bruce writes, I like. Well, I love F.F. Bruce. He's my favorite commentator. But he's made some mistakes, I think, in interpretation here and there. I can't read F.F. Bruce and think, boy, if he said it, that's true. F.F. Bruce ain't inspired. F.F. Bruce ain't infallible. Right? Besides, he's English, and what can good come out of England, right? Okay, so and here's the thing. So your worksheet on Romans, I've done this for you. See where I put author and date and all that, and I put the scripture text? I just went through Romans and did what I want you to do to every book you try to interpret. So the sample sheet in the back shows you the method I've used. Now, the second thing I want to do on the third reading, I'm going to do two things now. The third reading is more technical than the first or second. First of all, I'm going to go through here, and as I read through it, I'm going to make notes of the historical setting. As I read through here, I am going to compare what? Paragraph divisions. Now, turn over in your back to your sample sheet in the back to a sheet that looks like this. See that sheet has 3 parallel lines, and what I used, I think I used I used the American Standard Version of 1901, I used the Jerusalem Bible, and I used the Williams translation just on Romans 1 through 3:21. Now, so in parallel columns, as you read through the third time, what are you going to do? You're going to note the paragraph divisions of the major translations you're comparing. Why? Now, are any of you English teachers? Is there an English teacher here? In English, do you remember in high school English when you had to find the topical sentence of a paragraph? Now, in every paragraph in English, there's one sentence or phrase or clause that gives you the major thought of that whole paragraph, right? Because that's what a paragraph really is. It's one major thought developed, isn't it? And every sentence in that string of sentences should say something about that central thought. Well, now, paragraph division in the Bible is not inspired. That's why there's differing views from translations. You're going to try, because, again, I think it's too much to ask you to find the paragraph divisions. So note in your Bible what your Bible says the paragraph divisions of this unit that you're in has. And if you compare Bibles, you'll see they start varying a little bit, right? Well, that's okay. They're going to vary some. As you read through this the third time, see if you can find a Bible that divides it the way you think the subject matter is being divided, okay? And put a little summary out beside it. Paragraph, chapter 1, verse 1, introduction, okay? Chapter 1, verses 2 through 5, Paul prays for the recipient. You see what I'm doing? Now, let me tell you why I'm doing this. It's the whole purpose of these questions is to develop a detailed outline of this whole book of the Bible. Once you do this, you'll never have to do it again for this Bible book, right? This will give you every time you go back to Romans, you've already done Romans. You want to do it again. But the first time through, you want a detailed outline so you can follow the thought of the author, right? Now, if you put a little capsule beside the paragraphs, I've done this for third world pastors for this reason. They don't have a concordance. They don't have any way to check parallel passages. Parallel passages are the key to interpreting the Bible. It allows the Bible to interpret itself. So what I'm going to tell them is, if they'll capsule these paragraphs in simple words like salvation, justification, redemption, the Christian life, they can develop their own parallel paragraphs that way. Through time, they can have their own topical concordance of the Bible, okay? So for you, all you're doing is producing on your own a detailed content outline. Does that make sense to you? Why am I making you do that? Why not just go out and Ryrie's outline or C.I. Scofield's outline or the New International? Because those aren't inspired. And besides, you don't need the scholars at this point. You can do this. You say, but it saves so much. This will take me hours. I could go in 5 minutes. If you shortcut this now, and you can, you'll be dependent the rest of your life what other Christians think. But you don't have to be. You can do this. You can do this. You'll be so excited the first detailed outline you have that you did. You'll start your road to independence. And then when somebody says Mephibosheth's feet are a sign of grace, and you'll go, because you've done an outline on 2 Samuel, and you know that's not the author's intent of that book. Okay. So you identify the paragraph divisions, compare several, and capsule them in a brief thought.